This is Nabila, Rahman. I'm the Digital Transformation Strategist in United News of Bangladesh, UNB, and I've been holding leadership roles in the tech industries for many years. Today, I'm very excited to launch our 7th webinar of the Tech Collective, and the topic for today is Women in Technology, How to Become a UI UX Designer. Although most jobs in tech industry are dominated by men, it's surprising to note that the user interface, known as UI, and user experience, known as UX, design roles are significantly filled by women globally. And that makes me really happy. This is the first time I'm doing the Tech Collective where women dominates. So today we are going to discuss what makes UX design so compelling to women. And if not through formal education, how are women getting into these roles? UX is a relatively new field transitioning into, whether intentionally or not, is common. You might be a graphic designer at a marketing firm and gradually begin to learn about UX design because of a project you're working on. Then 5 years later, boom, you work in tech. The transition really can be that easy. Let's hear more about this exciting field and the possibilities in growing your career, whether you're a man or a woman. If you like our webinar, please like, share, and comment. Thank you. So like always, I'm very excited to introduce my co-host, Samuel Bretzfield, who's a tech entrepreneur living in Bangladesh for many years and will be co-hosting with me in this webinar. Sam, very excited to have you again. Please reintroduce yourself and our very special guest for today.
Absolutely, Nabila. I can't believe we're at number 7 of the Tech Collective. So excited to do this again. Please like, comment, and share our webinars. We want your feedback as always. We had a lot of feedback and a lot of really good comments from our last, the 6th episode. So I'm very excited today to continue with number 7. And today joining me and Nabila is Morgan Stemmer. Morgan Stemmer has over a decade of UI UX experience. I've had the absolute pleasure of working with Morgan in multiple engagements over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Morgan is a leader with an amazing track record of motivating and building teams, high-performing teams, very results-oriented, I should say. Working with Morgan has been a pleasure. Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us more about your path and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. Nice to be here. I nowadays there are, you can major in UI, UX, human interaction. There are specific majors for the field. I didn't go along that path. So I started as a graphic designer. It was something that I was always interested in, starting in school in my early days on the yearbook. And, eventually that became very digital with the start of the Adobe suite. I kept with it. I'd taken as many art classes in all different fields as I could. And, I decided to go into graphic design professionally. And, as I was designing and as I became better at the field and really started to hone my craft, I sort of started to want more, and I started to look at things. It happened naturally, more than just the way something looks on the page, because I wanted the projects that I was working on to be the most successful as possible. And so I started to think about, the viewer, that's what I would call it back then. And I would, really think about how they would digest and how they would really process that information and how the information would make them feel, even from a branding perspective. Started to think about interactions. What types of mission could we add to the page? What types of patterns do, as I said, viewers know? And I started to look at data And, at a certain point, this was when I was the creative director at an agency. I realized that what I was doing was no longer graphic design, and what I was doing was UX. And that was, UX is not a super new field. I think the term was coined, I think, in the 80s by Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen. But it went in the sense that, it's really becoming more of a typical field that you see in a company, right? It's becoming more popular and more well known. At that time, it wasn't as, and it's continuing to grow, the field itself, and continuing to become in higher demand at companies. And so once I realized that I was doing UX, I started to take courses and classes, and I started to read, and I started to learn and talk to people in the field, just to, really get more technical in that field and grow my, expertise in it.
Wonderful. And what about these, like you said, did you learn this in university, this UX UI design, like you learned, it was self-taught, you learned it yourself? Is there any special place where people can go and learn themselves, especially graphics designers, because we have a lot of them in Bangladesh, really talented ones. So how do you go to the next level?
Yeah, a lot of it was, I started kind of self-taught. As I said, this was something I was doing as a graphic designer. And so I did research, and I taught myself, and I read online. And then right now, we're so fortunate to live in a world where you can access so much information online, and where they have, especially now after the, pandemic, there's a ton of online courses from, anywhere from $12.99 US all the way up to, really high numbers. But you can take a course for, I think even Google's is maybe free. I don't know if it still is. I know it was. I think they may charge for the certificate, but I know that there are a ton of, very low cost courses and certifications that you can take. And I've taken many myself. And then, I learned from other individuals in the field. And I also use my LinkedIn as well to learn. There are several, pages that post a lot of really, really insightful content. I'm a huge fan of Nielsen Norman. They post a ton of research studies and best practices, as well as Smashing Magazine, which is a global entity where they have conferences and courses around the globe, and they post a ton of really insightful articles. One of their founders, Vitaly Friedman, he posts a ton of amazing links every day. He'll post probably like 3, and I'm just like, okay, save. It's the way that the world is. We can just learn so much from the internet in really free or low cost ways. And so for me, it was definitely a mix of all of that.
That's fantastic. Tell me, Morgan, I mean, what do listen, if I'm a young woman in Bangladesh looking to pursue a career in UI, UX, where do I start? Do you think your path, I think, pretty unique in the sense that you actually started, learning and doing, and then kind of building and building and building. Would you say it would be the same thing? Do you think it would be different?
I would say to read about it and read about the field, right? And see if it's something that you want to do and that you want to pursue. And, user experience is really about others. You're not designing what you think is best. You're putting yourself in the shoes of many, many people, and you're designing to make their lives better and their experiences better. And if that's something that interests you, I think then the decision is, all right, well, there's many different, UX is multidisciplinary, right? You can be a UX writer, you can be a UX designer, you can be a UX researcher, you can be a UI designer, or you can do UX and kind of do end to end, do a little bit of everything. So I think then it's about, reading up on those different multidisciplinary aspects and understanding what part of it really excites you. And if, for example, design, which is, I do end to end, so I do everything, but my focus being that I came from as a graphic designer, it is more on that design side. And so, I would look and see what tools you can get your hands on. I like Figma. Sketch is great. Adobe XD is good. I think it might be going away now that Adobe purchased Figma, but there's a ton of tools out there. And, I would maybe look at Coursera or, or Udemy and see if you can take a class and learn, how to use a tool, as well as, Miro is a really good tool for the analysis side of things. So I would start with the tools and, start by maybe, looking at people's portfolios, right? That's a really good way to see how people approach in a tangible way. UX portfolio, you could search any company and you'll find a bunch of results and just read through their case studies. And that'll give you a really good idea of what that end-to-end process should look like and how to approach these problems. And then you can try solving them for yourself. If you see a website and you're like, oh, this UX could be improved, that's a great opportunity for you to tackle that website, and you can put that on your portfolio. Even if you're not hired by the company to do it, you can still do a UX project.
That's great feedback. That's amazing. If so start thinking about the fact that you've led design teams and you've led large number of team members. What are some of the things that you look for in, say, somebody that would want to join your team? What are some of the key aspects that you would interview for?
Of course, it depends on the level, but I would say, if they have the basic technical skills that at the level that I'm interviewing for, that's most important. And then it goes a little beyond that. So when building teams, I really look for individuals who are coachable and who want to learn and who are curious. If someone's coachable, I can take a person from here to here and really just help them grow and blossom. And, so I would say be coachable, be respectful, and be kind and curious. Hardworking as well is another thing that I look for. I'm a person who always wants to learn. As I said earlier, I'm constantly reading. I'm still taking courses. I'm very active in the UX space. And so, someone who just has that thirst for knowledge and thirst for growth. And, I don't believe that you need to have a master's degree in UX to be successful. I think, you can, it's great if you do, it's great if you don't, right? I think life is what you make it. And I think if you're a hardworking, coachable individual, you'll do great.
That's great. I have another question based on this. What if I'm like this person really interested in learning UI, UX, has the motivation, has the skill, has the drive, but what is creativity important in this journey? Let's say they don't want to be a researcher, but they want to design. How important is creativity?
I think it's important to a certain degree because UX is every design pattern that we do is based on research. And so when you get to solving really complex challenges, that's when creativity and an innovative mindset really help you, because sometimes you need to invent new patterns and new layouts that don't exist anywhere else on the web. But when you're, designing a pretty simple workflow, like, a food delivery app, for example, there are so many out there and users have learned all these patterns. So you can really, it gives you this kind of baseline. I always say it's good to be innovative. I find that people who are newer to the field tend to be a little more hesitant to show that creativity and innovation and kind of play it safe. And so one of the things that I work on is, with them is encouraging them to try something new and really step out of their comfort zone, because the fastest way you're going to learn that something doesn't work is by trying something. And if you realize, okay, I tested this with users and no one liked it, it didn't perform well at all, great, then you know what not to do. So you're able to move forward faster and quicker.
I want to kind of dig in there really quickly. You used a very interesting term, patterns. So when we think of like, Uber or Uber Eats, are you suggesting that the pattern of the way that you kind of go through the experience has been really well defined and tested, if you will, because so many people have used that and they've gotten to a point where it's been refined and refined and refined that it just becomes kind of second nature of using an app. Is that kind of the thought process?
For sure. Yeah. And so, the team recently was working on a sort of wizard flow to sign up for something and give information. And we pulled out, I would say over 30 different examples and put all the screens in a big mural board and to really give us some inspiration and show and sort of define, okay, here's what's working, here's what's trending, here's what people know. If you're designing something and that kind of pulls from patterns that you see every day, it's more likely that a user is going to succeed and be successful with it because they're familiar with those and they know what to do next. It's not confusing. They don't have to learn something totally new. So I would, focus on those best practices and those, kind of patterns. And, for mobile, right, you're going to often see a really large button at the bottom because that's a really easy hit target, whereas a button may not be as large on desktop. Things like that.
That's fascinating. What do you think, the Apple's coming out with these augmented reality glasses, I think, in the next maybe year. How do you think UI UX impacts that? And how do you think the experience changes? Do you think we're all going to be sitting at the table instead of looking down? We're kind of looking out into space, moving our eyes. I mean, what do you envision?
I haven't dabbled too much in the, in that space, but I will say that UX goes even to, tangible objects, right? So when someone pushes that on button and puts the glasses on their face, right, that is part of that user experience journey. And there will be designers working on those glasses and the buttons and where they're located. Is this convenient for someone to hit? What are the gestures on these glasses to change the brightness, for example? Different, how does sound work? All the different things that would go into the glasses. Even a tangible item would have a UX designer. And then when you get into that AR interface, one of my designers does a lot of the VR and AR stuff, and everything digital really needs that UX designer. And that's one of the things that's awesome about this field is I believe it's here to stay and it's only going to grow, and demand for it is also only going to grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, very exciting. So, we should have asked this a long time ago, just for clarification. Can you just define the difference between user interface and user experience so that our audience understands what it all means?
So this is a question that, people ask and people write articles on all the time. And I think it's kind of subjective because people have different opinions on it. So I'll share mine. I'm not going to say it is the tried and true 100% answer that you should go by, what Morgan said forever. It is a gray area, but the way that I see it is UX is that sort of broader discipline. And if someone's a UX designer, that would be, in my mind, end to end, having the ability to take the process all the way from discovery to, delivery, and kind of really completing that full design thinking life cycle. Some people will say that UX is, sort of that discovery all the way up to a low fidelity prototype. And then that's when a UI designer would take it in. I agree with that, but I also know that in a lot of organizations, a UX designer does mean that end to end. So it does mean starting from discovery, doing research, iterating, getting it all the way to hi-fi, and then delivering it to engineering and iterating further. I think that the easiest way to go about this is talking about what is UI, because UX, as I said, it's such a gray area. Everyone defines it kind of differently. I just define it as the end-to-end user experience journey. And so UI is focused specifically on the interface. So what specifically someone will see, right? So a UI designer likely would not be conducting research and interviewing a user. A UI designer would be focused on, okay, how should this page be laid out? Or let me take a low fidelity prototype and turn it into something high fidelity, add that color, make it beautiful, take it to the next level. And really just someone who's focused on that, high fidelity user interface specific pattern.
Okay, so when you so when companies are usually looking for both UI UX designer, are there companies that just focuses on UI? Because I would think that you would need the whole end to end, from the discovery phase to the whole value chain of testing out with the customer and their customer journey, right? So does UI UX go hand in hand? I mean, you have to be both.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure, they go hand in hand. I'm seeing more, when you think about the different disciplines in UX, as we said, is UI, UX research, writing, and more, right? Design operations. There's more than just what I said, but I've been seeing more of, okay, we're hiring for a UX designer, and then the expectation is that that person can do the end to end. And then, maybe they're hiring for a UX researcher. I think I'm seeing less of someone who is specifically a UI designer. There are still plenty of companies out there who have UI designers and UX designers, but what I'm seeing lately is that sort of is becoming less common, because someone who is a UI designer still does care about that user and has this desire, I imagine, to want to really think about the solutions rather than just focusing on the final delivery aspect after someone else did kind of all of that discovery.
That's a good question, Nabila. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing? That was an interesting trend that I think you just mentioned. What other trends are you seeing in the industry right now, Morgan?
Lots of slate, slate kind of dark black buttons are really becoming pretty prominent in the space, as well as gradient treatments, right? So you'll see a lot of text gradients or button gradients of different sorts. For example, if you go to Apple's iPhone 14 pages, you'll see that the copy is in a gradient, and that gradient sort of moves through the text, and it's really eye-catching and engaging. And so just from a pure visual perspective, you're seeing a lot of these gradients out there. You're seeing this short but sweet copy, right? Lots. No longer are we designing for long form content. It's short and sweet because we know that we're only going to have people's attention for a short period of time, and also a strong focus on the hierarchy versus let's get this person to buy. It's more about what does this person need to know to buy, and what do they need to know first, second, and third, and then we can prompt them to buy or join or subscribe.
So let me ask a question. That's really interesting. So, like H&M, for example, I have friends that work there. They would send their employees out to New York, to Brooklyn, to do trending trips. And I said, what's a trending trip? And they said, listen, we just go out in New York, have a cup of coffee, and see what people are wearing, what the trends are. How do trends in UI UX kind of, I suppose percolate? Is it because there's some famous designer that does something famous? Is it because of Apple that, comes up with some new gradient? Like, how does that percolate down and then all of a sudden become a trend?
That's a great question. I think everything, even from style and from color, has to start somewhere. And I think it's almost like a domino effect. Mm-hmm. One person will do it, and then people will pick up on it and think it's sleek for whatever reason, or it'll perform really well, and then they'll release a study about why, and then other people will catch on. One of the things that has been of interest to me lately specifically is reviews and titles in reviews, and that was something the team was going about, and we were designing a review component, and I started to think about it, right? Why is a review the way that it is, and what part of a review is valuable, right? And I know as a consumer, when I have to write a review, coming up with a title is just an annoyance. And I also know, many titles are just like great products, but really when you're getting to the meat and when you're understanding what someone liked, it's not about the title, it's about that, actual review itself. And so I started to do some digging and I started to look around on the web, and I noticed that several companies do not include a title in their review anymore. And that's one of those patterns that I think is newer, right? I think that's not, people haven't caught on as much as the others that I mentioned before. But, one of the things I'm planning on doing just to test my assumptions and validate or invalidate the assumption that titles are, sort of no longer and bad UX is I'll run a study and I'll talk to users. But the fact that I am seeing it elsewhere in organizations where I know they have large, robust UX teams makes me feel a certain level of confidence that it is something worth, digging into and diving into a little deeper. I'll identify what bothers me, what don't I like, right? And it's about starting there and then and asking other people what do they think about this? How does this make them feel? And when I asked, some people like titles, but the majority didn't. And so I think people just start to question things, and I think it sort of happens progressively. But when you have such a large amount of people in this industry questioning things and coming to conclusions, and testing them, right? The conclusions are going to be the same or similar, and then that's going to become a trend and a best practice.
Yeah.
Really fascinating.
Very good question, Sam. I love that. Yeah. How
Thanks.
does it become trend? Yeah. And also,
Well, I don't know if it was more like clothes or, I mean, I think like, I was in New York over the summer, and, so many new like people wearing like high top jeans. Like, how does that become a thing? Right. Is it like, percolates out of one small group of like trendsetters or trendy, UI UX people, and then everybody's like watching them, and then it kind of goes there and there and there. But I think Morgan, the idea of like, a much bigger group that's spending maybe hundreds of, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on this stuff. Apple, for instance, probably has done a lot of research, but I also think like it's probably the data too. So that's great to hear that idea.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
I would just recommend ask why. If I see a design on the team and they put something in the design, and they know now that they should expect me to ask, what's the value of this, or talk to me about your approach. Why did you do this? And there needs to be a reason for everything that we do. It needs to all be so super intentional, and really, driven in data and driven in user behavior. And if you haven't collected the data yourself, I imagine that there's someone out there who has and who has published an article about it. And so you can utilize that.
Yeah, for sure. How do you test? Is it more of question and answer? Is it more using tools on screen that's tracking? Like, what are some of the best practices around that? What do you recommend for somebody that was, wanting to become a researcher?
So there's so many, hundreds of different ways that you can test. And, it's not, there's not one right test. I think it depends more on what answers you're trying to get. And so, I always teach teams to first focus on what are your hypotheses that you want to validate or invalidate? And I say, write those down. What are the questions that you have? And I say, write those down. And then, as they go through a project, as they're designing, keep a running list of this. That way, when we're ready to launch our test, we have sort of, okay, here's this sheet with everything that we want to learn, everything that we want to know. And then based on that, and also based on timeline, based on resources, we determine what the best method is to test and get those answers. I would say for someone starting out, a really kind of inexpensive, easy way to get started with this is, reach out to people in your network, friends, family, have them, join you in a video call or even in person. And if you can record it, that's even better, because then you can analyze it later, and talk to them and ask them questions. And, if you can make a clickable prototype and have them walk through something, or have them walk through a competitor's site and think out loud, that's awesome. And then, we've been working on emotional maps now. So we'll basically map out, when we're doing usability testing, we'll map out what people liked, what they didn't, and we'll put quotes, and then we'll kind of combine it. If you're doing that type of study, I think you want to talk to probably 5 or 6 different individuals to get data that, has enough significance to mean something. The other piece of, short and sweet advice that I can give is try to make your questions non-biasing and non-leading. So you don't want to ask, what do you like about this? Because then you're assuming that someone likes anything, and maybe they hate everything, right? I mean, and that's okay if they do, because if they hate everything, then you learned, as I said earlier, not to do it that way. And so, what are your thoughts about this? Or, please rate this on a scale of, 1 being this, 10 being this, and really try to focus on the non-leading questions. There are plenty of guides out there in the world for, how to write interview questions or how to write scripts, and utilize one of those, and read people's case studies as well when on their portfolios. Again, going back to what I said earlier, you'll see the types of artifacts people create based on user interviews. Everyone does. There's tons that you can make. You can conduct surveys too. And then another way, if you have a live product, you can use Google Analytics. You can use a tool like Heap or Pendo or Hotjar to look into data. You can use A/B tests, right? So A/B tests are one of my favorite methods to test. But as someone starting out, you may not have the ability to access these types of tools. And so I think, just even talking to your friend, your family, and having a discussion about it.
Yeah, that's
Great.
great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
One last question. I think we are almost at the end. So there are a lot of opportunities. We learned a lot today. What are some of the challenges of being a UI UX designer, and how do you manage or overcome them?
I think, this is it's an up and coming field. I know it's one that's really made its place lately, but it's continues to grow, and continues to create a presence in different areas of all different industries, right? I see so many different companies now trying to build a UX team, and I think that's probably the challenge right there is the fact that because it isn't something that's been around and understood and prioritized for so many years, like, a software engineer, for example, there's a lot of, the knowledge base isn't quite there yet. When I tell someone that I am a user experience designer, people sort of have often blank faces, or they have questions and they don't know what that is. And, so if your friends don't know what that is, or if your family doesn't know what that is, imagine being one of the first or second or third UX designers in a company. Do you think everyone in the company is going to know what it is? And so, it's about educating your teammates and your cross-functional partners on what it is, what UX is, why it's important, how it should be done, and also proving that it leads to results, right? So determining a way of tracking and tracking performance and tracking the improvements that the UX has made. And with that, I often say to look at, okay, if you join a company and, what metrics are important to them, and then sort of tie up your measures of success to those, company measures of success and what people value. And then from that education perspective, it's one of the kind of foundational things that I'll do when I join a company is think through and encourage others to think through, what problem are we solving here? And how is this going to help us achieve the company vision and the company goals versus, let's change this blue to a lighter shade because I think it's prettier. Is that really something we should be prioritizing? Is that solving any of our user problems? Is it, and just kind of putting it into perspective and framing it in UX language, I think is helpful.
Mhm.
That's a really good point. I mean, I love that comment. Instead of changing color, let's like really understand what problems we're solving. I think that makes so much sense. That's great. Morgan, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak to us about UI UX. I hope the audience got something out of this. I hope people get excited about this field because it's going to be and is a big part of how we interact with technology, right? It's what we see in front of us and how we navigate apps and websites and you name it. So Morgan, thank you very much. Appreciate the insights, appreciate your time. Nabila?
Yeah, I just learned so much, Morgan. I mean, I knew about UX UI, but I didn't know all the in-depth that you guys are doing. And it's also for our audience, I think it's what you brought up some very important points. It's important to remember that UX UI aren't always just designers. There's so many other opportunities to explore careers in this growing field, and there are positions that are required to keep any platform user-friendly. There are writers, there are programmers, there's researchers, there's strategists, from the testers from the UI UX perspective, and so much more, all that collaborate to create a final output or product. I think it's fabulous. You just don't have to have it's not important to be a graphic designer also. You can learn this. It's a transferable skill with the right talent, hard work, and network. Anybody, and if the right passion, I think you can be a UX UI designer, and there's plenty of opportunity in this field. As you said, Morgan, it will continue to grow, not only from apps and websites, but also there are opportunities to work across all industries to create and improve both digital and physical products. I think it's so important.
Yeah, that was
Thank
a good
you
point
so
too,
much.
Morgan.
Yeah,
For sure. Yeah,
The goal
you're
as
welcome.
well. I didn't even think of that. Thinking
Yeah.
like, how do you turn on a button, right? That you're such user experience. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure. And Nabila, you brought up a great point that I think would be useful to the audience is, for those of you who maybe are less confident about your graphic design skills, take a look at a design system. So a design system will have all of these components, and by component I mean a button, a link, a table, a slider, maybe a badge, all the different pieces that one would need to create a site or an entity. And there's a ton of them that are open source that you can, download into Figma, or that you can look at online. Google's Material Design is one of them. And there's a ton more. I know VMware has one, and, there's so many. I think even HubSpot's is public as well. And so you can start there, and you can play around and look at their system and see how they're doing things and learn from it, and learn, okay, this is how a button should look, etc. And companies have design systems, especially larger ones, that you can utilize as well. And so you don't need to be a person who can create every single thing, the little elements. Sometimes you'll have the team to create them for you as well.
Wow, that just blew my mind. So I have a question. Sorry, don't mean to keep this going, but really fascinating. Would you then say that Apple has all this stuff already predefined and built out from the buttons that they use? All of it, all that thought through, that they can just pull kind of like out of a repository, be like, oh, today we need a slider, so we're going to use the slider that we came up with that's been fully tested, A/B tested. We know this one works. Wow, that's crazy.
So, the team, all teams, we've built our design system. And so there's, the engineers use it as well, right? So then they can have a reusable front-end coding system. And then the designers have the same components in a library that they can kind of drag and drop. And there are, different documentation and different use cases. So, if this, use this one, if this, use this one, and you sort of write this guidance, and it's just a guide, and that shows someone what to use and when. And also the nice thing about it is, often, as you said, Sam, they're tested for usability, they're tested for accessibility. And so it makes things easier for the teams.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Insightful. I never thought of that. Good.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure.
Sam and Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan. This is fun.
Yeah, if you like this episode, please like, comment, and share, and let us know what topics you would like to see next.